Hey there, A's Day fans. Welcome to our Tuesday edition of our show. Hope you all had a nice, relaxing, and restful weekend and are at the start of a productive week for all. I'm your host, Joe Grado. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to listening to our thoughts on everything A's baseball. Today is Tuesday, March 3rd. We got a good show for you. Our main topic of discussion to lead things off, no pun intended, we're going to try to dive amongst four different potential candidates in this A's starting projected lineup and determine who's leading off. And then after that, we are going to continue on with our A's player preview and prediction as we are headed to the backstop, entering his fourth full year as the green and gold catcher. Of course, we're talking about Shea Langeliers. Good show for you today. We're excited to be closer and closer, under a month away until the A's are back in action for regular season baseball. But until then, we'll be here to capture all the excitement and the buildup surrounding these A's. Holy Toledo, let's go A's. There, A's Day fans, thank you once again for tuning in to our Tuesday edition of our show, or whenever you're listening to this edition of A's Day. We appreciate all of your support. Be sure to continue to check us out on wherever you listen to your favorite podcast episodes. You can find all of the episodes of A's Day uploaded, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, iHeartRadio, and so many more. Wherever you can download some podcasts, you'll be able to download A's Day as well. In addition, check us out on our social media platforms on Instagram at A's Day Baseball Podcast, on X, formerly known as Twitter, at A's Day Baseball, and be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel for A's player interviews, video editions of all of our podcast episodes, as well as A's Destination Baseball Virtual City Guides, many more that are to come, including Sacramento, but others to follow. We'll keep you up to speed once we are able to schedule those content creation trips and announce them at the appropriate time. Tons of content is on the way to our A's Day YouTube channel, so head there. You don't want to miss it. And to become an official subscriber of A's Day, check us out on our Patreon site, patreon.com/A's Day. For just $2 a month, you'll be entered to win monthly A's Day t-shirts, A's autographed memorabilia, future A's game tickets, and so much more as we are able to grow this platform collaboratively. All right. Let's get our discussion talking here. Let's get it started about who's leading off for this A's team. The A's are currently returning a top 10 offense according to last year's metrics, which fortunately received an upgrade via the trade when the A's acquired Jeff McNeil from the New York Mets, who is most likely going to be the team's everyday second baseman, although he can fill in at third when someone may need a day off, and could also fill in the corner outfield spots too. So definitely some versatility from McNeil. But in terms of what you're going to see from Jeff day in and day out, most likely primarily will be over at the second base position. And with him, he does have a pedigree of leading off at different times in his career. So he'll definitely be involved in today's discussion. But there's also other candidates and arguments that can be made for proper construction of this lineup. And the fact that we're having this conversation today, this is a good problem to have. Because when there's a discussion about who's leading off, that means one of two things. That means, well, your team is flat out not good and you don't have enough depth to figure out who should be setting the tone. That's not the case here. So it must be the other reason. There's a lot of versatility and talent up and down 1 through 9 in this order. That is a great problem to have. Now, everyone does serve their role, and today we're not going to be talking about anybody like Brent Rooker or Tyler Soderstrom leading off, but there will be one that actually is projected to be the leadoff hitter this year, but it also could be viable to slide down to the 2, 3, or even 4 spot in more of a run-producing role. That just goes to speak to the talent on this roster and on this lineup, that they're going to have to play around, especially with certain matchups. Like you might have a left-handed hitter leading off on days against right-handed pitching, and then you might flip it when you have a left-handed pitcher that you're going up against. And the good news is the A's are built for both. While old school would say that you'd like to trot out your same consistent lineup more times than not, I agree. I do feel like there should be some continuity, but I'm also completely fine blending in the modern metrics. And perhaps there are certain days where there's a tough lefty that leading off a left-handed hitter may not be beneficial for your team. And I'm not saying that should be cookie cutter for every lefty, every righty, and vice versa. But I do think there is some credence to that. So I think finding that perfect balance and perfect blend of multiple different ways of there's multiple ways to skin a cat. There's definitely many ways for you to get to the promised land at the end of the day. So it's just kind of trying to find a way to navigate what is upcoming, the 162 game schedule marathon. So with that, we are going to discuss 4 different potential options that have either been mentioned as being in the run-in of being the A's leadoff hitter, or someone perhaps that we feel could fit that bill. And we are going to discuss them in our opinion of, based on what we've been hearing in terms of likelihood that this player you will see getting consistent at-bats in the leadoff spot. And the one that we're going to start with is a little bit shocking when you first start the discussion, but when you dive in a little bit deeper, you understand where the A's are coming from, why they want to lead this guy off, where you take a look at him and he does seem like a typical slugger type, gets on base, does strike out a bit, but could also be a consistent run producer. So I guess if you want to set the tone in a big way, that is one way to go. And of course, we're going to lead off our discussion talking about 2025 Rookie of the Year first baseman, Nick Kurtz. Nick Kurtz, he is the reigning award winner of that rookie nomination, as well as being a nominee for the Hank Aaron Award, which commemorates or awards the best offensive player in your respective league. So Kurtz was one of 10 players in the American League to be even nominated, to be voted to win that award. I believe Aaron Judge ended up winning that from the New York Yankees. But Kurtz, he ended up popping 36 home runs this past year, hitting .290 and getting on base at a .380 clip in 117 games. He did have a 12.9 walk percentage as well, and consistently, time in and time out, like I mentioned, showed he is a consistent run producer at the top that gets on base at a pretty good clip. The reason for my hesitancy here is nothing against Kurtz. The only one number that stood out to me where I would be a little bit alarmed of having this for my leadoff hitter was the strikeout rate. And I'm not overly alarmed in terms of the overall output for Kurtz's game. I understand that comes with the territory when you do have a bigger slugger of that type. While it seemed like last year, Kurtz, he struck out 30.9% of the time. So that's a high number. If you have that in the middle of your order, you can live with it because you know that more times than not, he's going to come through runners on and end up in the range of 95 to 115 RBIs year in and year out. Popping 30, 40 home runs, you know what you're getting. Now, if that's what you're getting in the leadoff position, you better hope that Kurtz is consistent with the production. The 12.9 walk percent is pretty good, but I do think could leave a little bit more room for improvement, especially at the leadoff spot. Out of these candidates, that actually factors in towards the top of how these guys performed last year, so you can understand where the A's are coming from. He had nearly a 400 on-base percentage. He walked nearly 13% of the time. If you cut down those strikeouts, even bringing it to the mid to low 20s, that's going to have Kurtz be perhaps an even more productive player. And that's the beauty of where Kurtz is at, only entering his age 23 season. We've only reached the tip of the iceberg. He's just scratching the surface. There's still so much growth that we are going to be able to witness in West Sacramento. So that would be my only hesitancy. And the reason why we led off with Kurtz is because he's currently projected, according to Fangraphs, to be the A's leadoff hitter to at least start the year. And I feel like the A's put Kurtz in the leadoff position quite a few times last year, and they saw getting that leadoff walk would lead to some offensive traffic. So perhaps with that fear of giving into Kurtz, perhaps they would like to utilize those free passes and turn them into adding on some additional runs to help support the pitching staff. That still is a work in progress. So I'd be fine with it. You know, you want to have your best players get the most at-bats as possible. So typically you're going to get that from the 1 or 2 spot, even 3. But 1 and 2 typically are going to have your most plate appearances. So if part of the reason is also wanting Kurtz to have the most plate appearances of anyone in this lineup, totally get that argument. Me too, because when he has that bat in his hand and it makes contact, it's usually loud and runs are coming in pretty consistently. And I do think that is something that he will improve on, Kurtz, and cutting down with 2 strikes, perhaps a little bit less chase, at least less chase earlier in the count. But that's all part of the maturation process. Like I said, last year was a huge foundation that Kurtz set, and we've only just begun. So that's our first candidate. We do feel that Kurtz is going to end up being the leadoff guy, at least out of camp. And then I'm sure if the lineup isn't as congruent as Kotsay would hope, then perhaps they'll tinker around with it, dependent on matchups too as well. But looking forward to seeing how that all shakes out. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the Big Amish has in store for 2026. Our next candidate we are going to discuss is a guy that finished actually second in Rookie of the Year voting last year and was the starting shortstop in this past year's All-Star game for the American League. Of course, talking about Jacob Wilson. He is a consistent contact and low strikeout type guy. Definitely fits the mold of a potential prototype leadoff hitter makeup. On the year, he hit .311, which was good for second in the American League, hitting 13 home runs, 62 RBIs, a .355 on base, and a 7.5% K rate. While the concern here is he doesn't walk a ton. He had a 5.2 walk percent, but that's because Wilson is someone that is an aggressive hitter and likes to get his pitch earlier in the count and not leave it in the pitcher's or even umpire's hands with 2 strikes. So that's why you see Wilson's consistent aggressive approach. What I like about it is that you are creating action right out of the gate. Of course, Wilson is human and he is going to strike out from time to time, but typically, especially out of the candidates in this group, he is probably going to strike out the least. He is an Arias type from the right side with a little more pop. And I think for Wilson, what we're seeing early in spring training, which is a little concerning, is you're starting to see that chase rate increase just a bit, especially on those fastballs right above the hands. Hopefully, Wilson's just getting that out of his system. But if that's something that continues on as a trend into the season, perhaps that increased chase rate could be a problem in that leadoff spot. But the reason why we have Wilson here at second, as the second candidate, as we feel that Wilson would be the leading candidate to be the leadoff hitter against left-handed pitching. And I believe the philosophy in putting the ball in play more times than striking out, as compared to Wilson, another guy who is young in his career, perhaps could show a little bit more patience as he matures in his career. But hopefully with that, it doesn't lead to an increase with the strikeout rate, perhaps taking too many pitches. So I would like this as well. I feel like Wilson may fit the prototype of being a leadoff hitter a bit more than Kurtz, just because of that inflated strikeout rate that Kurtz has. Now, if he cuts that down significantly, then I think he is a stronger candidate than Wilson, because Wilson doesn't strike out a ton, but he doesn't walk a ton as well. So that contact needs to be pretty above average content more times than not for him to get on first base. And what we saw was an average exit velocity this past year that was a little bit lower than league average, but all in all, he still got plenty of hits. He hit over 300, and again, I think the big thing that we took from last season was that Wilson, for the most part, got through last year healthy. I know he had a brief IL stint, but besides that, was typically available for the club. And looking forward to him to build upon that and become an even better shortstop as well, because you saw a lot of the flashy plays that he would make, but sometimes you could see where his range to a certain side would limit to him a little bit, and some of his defensive metrics took a hit in the process. But that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about how he would fit the leadoff spot, and I think he would fit it well, because I feel being able to create that action early in counts, especially with the first batter that pitcher is going to face, and immediately there's contact, the ball is in play, that may put just a little bit of hint and doubt that could pay off for your team later in the long run, or perhaps maybe it gets through, or perhaps the defense makes an error. They're not on their toes as much as they should be. A lot can happen when you just put the ball in play, and Jacob Wilson gives you the best chance on this team to do that. At least that's what the numbers say. Now, we are going to take a look at our third candidate, and this is actually, not to give away a spoiler here, but this would be my personal number one choice for who the A's should be leading off this year consistently, and I'll get into why in just a moment. So we're talking about next the third candidate, Jeff McNeil. So we talked about him at the top of this segment of the show, that he was acquired from the Mets via trade. And on the year, he hit .243 this past year in 122 games, hitting 12 home runs, 42 RBIs. He had a .335 on base, a 10.6% walk rate, and 11.9% K rate. So these numbers from a middle infielder, a lot of middle infielders would take, but this, from the pedigree that McNeil, a former batting champion to my knowledge, this was a down year for him. But he did battle through a couple different injury bugs, but through all of those struggles, his walk and K rates remain pretty consistent. And I like that these numbers are pretty balanced. He has a walk rate above 10, which is great, and he has a K rate below 15, which is great. I think that's the formula right there for your prototypical leadoff hitter. You want someone that's going to grind out at-bats, someone that's going to take ball four and put that pressure and turn that free pass into a run, or getting it to scoring position, moving it, whatever the case may be. And someone that mixed in is not going to strike out at a high rate, that is going to put the ball in play with two strikes, even if it's an out. Maybe there's a runner on second, less than 2 outs, pulls a ball to first base to get the runner over to third. Jeff McNeil is a professional hitter. He does all of these things that I just mentioned. And on a A's team that is definitely ascending and is getting closer and closer to being in those postseason conversations, why wouldn't you bring in your new prized veteran to set the tone and be like, hey guys, I know you got all this power, all this pop, scoring runs, getting base hits, all that. But let me show you how a professional does it. Setting the tone at the top of the order is key. You want someone that's going to look at, force the opposing pitcher to throw 5, 6, 7, 8 pitches. Someone that is going to put pressure and put down that pitcher's hand to the point where they feel they don't have enough to beat you. Once you get a pitcher in that spot, then the floodgates are going to open from there. Their command may waver, may open up to some more free passes, or getting an opportunity to hit pitches in more favorable hitting zones because their mind is elsewhere. Just because when pitchers may be making their pitches, hitting the corners, mixing speeds, Jeff McNeil has been a professional at fending those type of pitches off. And I'm very surprised that unless there's a lingering injury issue or something of that ilk, it doesn't seem like there's been a ton of conversation having McNeil in that leadoff spot. I'm sure we'll see it from time to time during spring just to see that look. But to me, this is clear cut. This is your leadoff hitter. This is nothing against Jacob Wilson. This is nothing against Nick Kurtz. Personally, I'd love to see Wilson more in the 2 or 5 hole type. Someone that can extend the order in that 5 hole, pass the baton to the bottom of the order. Or someone at the top that could pass it to the middle of their order. And then as for Nick Kurtz, I want him in a run-producing situation. I want him somewhere 2 to 4. Jeff McNeil is going to get on base at a pretty good clip. I feel like he's 100% healthy coming into this year, and you're going to see a return to form there. Not saying he's going to be that batting champion type, but I think he's going to be a lot closer to that than what we saw last year. At least try it, right? Wouldn't that make sense? Wouldn't you want Kurtz, Rooker, and Soderstrom and Langeliers all coupled together? All those heavy hitters together. One of those guys is going to come through more times than not with runners on base and put tremendous pressure and put a crooked number up on the scoreboard. So to me, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense in comparison to having Nick Kurtz in a leadoff spot where they can pitch around him, and then you're taking away a power threat right there, right off the bat. I do know you have depth in this lineup, and that perhaps you can force their hand and force pitchers to pitch to Kurtz. Who's pitching to Nick Kurtz, especially in April? Not based on the tape he put up through those 117 games. So to me, having Kurtz lower in the order perhaps is going to make opposing pitchers forced to have to pitch to him if there isn't an open base. Whereas McNeil, he sets the tone. Even if he's not hitting at a 300 clip, if he's hitting 260, 270, he's still going to see 6, 7, 8 pitches. Even if he grounds out to second, grounds out to short. Do you know what that does for the hitters behind you? You probably in that time saw at least 2 to 3 different pitch types from that opposing arm to give you a plan of what you can expect and how you can personally be successful. That's team hitting. That's how you pass the baton down the line to the next guy. So to me, I would want my veteran there at the leadoff spot, someone that I still think could be productive in 2026. And if it doesn't work out, so be it. But I want to see a return to baseball common sense. And I want to see leadoff hitters be leadoff hitters and power guys in power spots. Because I feel like when you have that opportunity, when you have that alignment, especially with a team that is so deep offensively, when you have guys in the proper spots, you're going to see a continued progression and positive development because guys are able to settle into what their role is. If you have Nick Kurtz lead off, then bat fourth and third and fifth, yeah, he had a heck of a season. But is that going to hinder his development sometime down the road? Same thing with any baseball player, especially on this A's team. There are guys young that have had a ton of success, and there are guys that are still looking to find their way. But I think if you start playing a little bit more with common sense, having guys be in roles that they were built for, I think you'll even see some more consistency there. So that's my personal choice. I feel like Jeff McNeil, to me, it's a no-doubter. In fact, when they traded for him, my mind immediately went there. Okay, McNeil, you can do McNeil, then Rooker, then Wilson, then Kurtz. Or you can do McNeil, Rooker, Kurtz. You can play around with it. Soderstrom and Langeliers, you can play around with it so many different ways. But to me, the picture was painted the most clearly, the clearest. There we go. When Jeff McNeil was in the leadoff spot. I want to see it. And if I'm so far off base and I'm wrong, I want you all that have heard this to come back on here or sound off in the social media comments. Let me know, how could I have a thought like that? Maybe it's my gut, but I don't know. Based on these numbers I'm looking at, based on just the eye test of what I've seen from these players in their career, obviously McNeil has a much bigger sample size. But to me, it almost makes too much sense to at least let me see it. Let me see McNeil thrive in the leadoff hole or struggle mightily. Then he can move him down to the 5-6 hole and then try Kurtz or Wilson or another emerging candidate that perhaps isn't meeting our forefront. But we do have one more candidate that we did want to discuss because he actually was in this leadoff spot last year. But due to the mighty struggles that he had during the 2025 season, I don't think this is a spot that is viable for this player at the moment. And of course, talking about right fielder Lawrence Butler. He is a man that is the clear vision of what version of Butler are we going to get in 2026. Are we going to get the guy that we saw in the second half of 2024 go absolutely off, which led to the A's making that 7-year extension to him heading into the 2025 year? Or are we going to see the up and down, indecisive, at least offensively, from Butler? And we were made aware of this offseason that Butler was battling a significant knee issue throughout the majority of the year, an issue that he has gotten cleaned up since and is going to be all cleared to go for in the midst of spring training, but also for the start of the regular season. So perhaps the struggles that we saw last year, you can attribute to him playing on one healthy leg, and you can see it was kind of a domino effect from there. If you're not feeling necessarily super confident with your lower half, there are some things that can leak with your upper half, and it can be a trickle-down effect from there. It could lead to some indecisiveness, which, if you were watching regularly, you can see that with Butler's at-bats when things weren't going great. You can see him take certain pitches in certain counts in hitter-friendly situations that normally he would unload on, but because he was second-guessing himself getting that trigger off, perhaps he was caught in between and led to him having a little bit more increase in chase. And you can see the inflated K percentage, which we'll get to here shortly. Because this past year, he batted .234. He played 152 games, hit 21 home runs, 63 RBIs, did steal 22 bases, hit to a 710 OPS, a 306 on base, a 9.4 walk percentage, but here's the alarming part, a 28.4 K percentage. So that's my biggest part of concern. Same thing we said with Kurtz, but at least with Kurtz, he had the production to overshadow that inflated K percentage. Butler, with a sub 750 OPS, hitting not even 250, and striking out at this rate was just not the season that all of us were expecting, and I'm sure Lawrence Butler would be the first to tell him himself. And we weren't aware of the severity of the knee issue throughout this past year, so credit to him for not leaning on that as an excuse. We weren't really made aware of that clearly until October or November. But with that, I think there's a lot more in the tank for Butler that we haven't seen yet. I think he's a lot closer to that player we saw in the second half of 2024 as compared to last year. Now, I will say defensively, he did seem to be a plus. He was versatile, mainly playing right field, but filled in center field when Denzel Clark hit the injured list for the long term. So Butler, he definitely flashed some leather. I do think the routes still could be a bit crisper, but certainly made a lot of plays that he even commented after that Clark would have made himself. He was showing off his inner Denzel Clark. So I think with Butler in this leadoff spot, you would think, honestly, heading into last season, he seemed to be the perfect prototypical hitter for that. Someone that can have above average high quality contact, also was getting on base at a pretty consistent clip. The strikeout rate was there, but he was stealing bases, he was getting on base a little bit more. And mix that all in with that stolen base threat, the main stolen base threat on this team, by the way. You would love to have that tool at the top of your order to be able to make life a little bit easier for the middle of your order to be basically move into runner scoring position with your legs. But just because Butler, that on-base percentage barely being above 300, is just not going to get it done in the leadoff spot. And until he can cut down on that strikeout percentage, again, maybe long-term, Butler, he continues his development and turns into that leadoff hitter type that believe he can be. He also has that pop, hit the 21 home runs. So having all those tools out of your one spot would be an X factor without a doubt. But with the combination of the lack of on base and the increase in strikeout rate, until he gets those figured out, getting those numbers closer, having a little bit more balance in his overall hitting profile, I just don't think Lawrence Butler, he's better suited for a 5, 6, 7 hole type. And let him get better pitches to feast on, build up that confidence, and hopefully 2026, between the combination of a healthy knee and increasing some size and strength, that we'll see a better Butler in 2026. But for now, just don't think he fits the bill to be the A's leadoff hitter. This episode was brought to you by Tom's Watch Bar in Sacramento. Level up your game day experience with a menu that goes beyond the ordinary. From elevated sports bar classics to chef-driven dishes and bold, crave-worthy flavors, every bite is crafted to delight. Pair with an ice-cold beer, a handcrafted cocktail, or a refreshing seltzer, and you might just forget you're in a sports bar. 50-plus beers, 75-plus screens, 50-plus specialty cocktails, Sacramento's biggest sports bar, Sacramento's biggest sports party, every game, every day, all the games that matter. And with that, we are going to continue on with our next edition of A's Player Preview and Prediction. We continue marching closer and closer to opening day as the A's are ramping up to kick off the 2026 slate against the defending American League champion Toronto Blue Jays up in Canada on March 27th. But until then, we continue to preview the outlook of this year's roster as we head behind the dish and talk about catcher Shea Langeliers. Langeliers, if you did not know, is a native of Portland, Oregon. He will be entering his age 28 season as he had a birthday this offseason, November 18th. He does currently have 3.051 years of MLB service time and is under team control through the 2029 season, although he does become arbitration eligible in 2027. He made his MLB debut back in 2022 with the A's and has cemented himself as a cornerstone catcher, showing vast improvement on a yearly basis as he enters his 4th year as the full-time catcher in the green and gold. This past year, he's coming off a career offensive breakout. In 123 games played, he batted .277, 31 home runs, 72 RBIs, hitting to an .861 OPS. Along with that, he carried a 6.9 walk percentage, which is a career best, and a 19.7 K percentage, a number that was reduced by 8% from 2024. So kudos to Langeliers on cutting down with 2 strikes and putting a little bit more action against the defense. If it wasn't for the historic season of catcher Cal Raleigh up in Seattle with the Mariners hitting 60 home runs this past season, there would be much more fanfare around the performance of Langeliers this past year. He had 19 home runs following the All-Star break, which I believe tied him with, or was second most behind Colson Montgomery, who popped 21 in the second half of the year, including hitting 11 home runs in August, which was good enough to name him American League Player of the Month in August, where he just went on an absolute tear. During his development, Langeliers has improved to middle-of-the-range metrics in both blocking and framing, with more improvement in that aspect of his game still to come. During this past year, he did struggle with some throwing errors, but I feel like a lot of those times when he missed high, it was because the pitcher that he was working with didn't do the best job controlling the base running game. So those runners would get a good jump, and Langeliers would be forced to try to release it quicker than expected, causing the ball to sail high and allowing that base runner to advance onto third base. So those are a couple things we're hoping that Langeliers will improve upon and continue with his development. But he has made tremendous strides. He went from a guy that was seen as someone as an offensive first catcher that has a lot of pop but is going to be a low average and on base guy and was going to be a struggle defensively. That isn't the case anymore. He is truly turning into the complete package. Offensively, you saw the average increase significantly. But what I love to circle is that K percentage dropping 8 percentage points. That's hard to do year to year unless you're locked in, you have that preparation, you have that plan. And I think part of it was Langeliers' willingness to take the ball to opposite field, seeing the ball a little bit deeper as compared to trying to get so pull happy and just be focused on those vast power numbers. But Langeliers absolutely is someone that continues to get better on a year-to-year basis, and very excited to see what he can contribute heading into 2026. There have been some discussions around Langeliers perhaps getting an extension done. But with him being represented by Scott Boras, I feel like they're going to do everything in their power that if he doesn't maximize his player value, that they're going to wait for him to get to free agency. And that's not until 2029. So by then, perhaps Langeliers' value is going to climb even more through the roof. However, Langeliers may be in a unique spot because of the position he plays. So he is a catcher and has the primary amount of games that he does log on a year-to-year basis. So this is around the time where you start seeing perhaps catchers slow down a little bit, just because there's a lot more wear and tear on their body as compared to other position players around the diamond. But I don't think Langeliers has shown any signs of slowing down. In fact, he has a ton of momentum coming from the second half of last year where I believe it was over 55 or 57 games, hitting .293 with 19 home runs. I feel he's got a ton of momentum heading into 2026. And I still think he still has some more growth in his game. Like, I don't feel like we've seen the best. I think we're pretty close to seeing where his ceiling is. But I do think there's still a little bit more where he can show a little bit more play discipline, get on base at a little bit higher of a clip with the on-base percentage, but love that continued trend of him cutting down on those strikeouts, with him now being below league average with that. I think league average is around 21-22%. So the fact that Langeliers has gotten down to 19, especially at the catching position, is rather impressive in itself. So looking forward to seeing what 2026 brings. You got to imagine that Raleigh isn't going to have another historic season like he did last year. I think he'll be on track to have another all-star campaign, but perhaps some of the limelight could be saved for the play of what Langeliers is doing on a nightly basis for the green and gold. So, for his outlook, what I'd look to see is for him to continue to improve on the blocking and framing, like I mentioned, but when all of these situations are right in terms of the landscape of the running game, and the pitcher is holding them properly, Langeliers still showcases a strong and accurate arm. So looking for him to continue to gun down runners at a pretty decent clip, but want to see a continued improvement with those blocking and framing numbers. In addition, like I mentioned, wouldn't hurt to see a little bit of an increase with that on-base percentage. I do think that's something that is always welcome, especially on a younger team where you may see guys get a little bit more swing happy and see a little bit less willingness of the walk to be taken as compared to guys that have been doing a little bit longer. So perhaps Langeliers can be one of those guys, now probably considered more of a veteran type stalwart, to be able to show the way for some of these younger A's on how to be a professional hitter and do it right. All right, on the 2026 campaign, according to Fangraphs, he projects as follows. So they project Langeliers to hit an even 250 with 27 home runs, 68 RBIs, a walk percentage of 7.5, and a K rate of 22.7, an on-base of 311, and a slug of 484. So they expect him to strike out a little bit more, but they expect him to walk a little bit more. So that just becomes, I think, we're probably on the same mindset here in terms of the maturation process of a young hitter, that naturally that more walks are going to be taken, especially in a lineup that continues to increase its depth. The over-under we're going to look at, and today I want to look at the home runs for Langeliers. They project him to hit 28 home runs. Yeah, I said 27. My apologies. It was actually 28 home runs that they project. We're going to take the over. He hit 31 last year, and I do think this team has a little bit more experience going into this year, which means I think they're going to see more pitches. I feel like Langeliers is going to have a lot of great stability in front of him and perhaps a little bit of protection even behind him. Just kind of depends on where Langeliers ends up in the lineup. But couple that with also having another full season opportunity to play at the second most hitter-friendly park in the league behind Coors Field, where Sutter Health Park in West Sac basically plays like the Coors effect without that top level. Balls really do fly out there. So with Langeliers, I'm expecting another solid season from him. Hammer the over here, over 28. I'm going to say Langeliers is going to hit 33 home runs this year. That sounds like a good number for me, and feel like perhaps if it all shakes out, that he could end up on the All-Star team this year. But I feel like that's the ceiling for him. We'll see how it all shakes out. But I do think a solid season is in store for Langeliers, and would love to see possibly after this season the A's continue their extension talks with Langeliers and perhaps get something done sooner rather than later, especially as he's approaching arbitration. That's typically could be a good job for both teams to meet before it gets to that point. And for the A's' sake, in order to avoid losing him down the road when they're already in Vegas, perhaps you can lock him up on a long-term deal now, something that is going to be financially lucrative for Langeliers, but perhaps could save them a little bit of value as compared to the value that he can build up between now and in 2029 when he is first eligible for arbitration. So we'll see how it all goes, but that is a wrap on another edition of A's Player Preview and Prediction. We talked about Shea Langeliers. We're excited. We had the opportunity to speak and meet with him last year during spring training twice, so can't thank him enough for his time. And if he ever wants to come on A's Day, would love to further our conversation and see what sights he has set for 2026. Best of luck to old Bangaliers, and looking forward to seeing him mash many dingers into the West Sacramento night. And with that, that brings us to the close of another edition of A's Day. So on today's show, we led off talking about the discussion, looking at 4 different candidates, determining who's going to lead off for the A's this year in 2026. Our pick is Jeff McNeil, but I feel like there's other candidates that the A's perhaps are looking at a little bit further, but also will be solid candidates in themselves and feel like they will have successful 2026. That is the beauty of having a lineup with the depth it currently has. And then before getting on out of here, we continued on with our daily series, continuing on with A's Player Preview and Prediction as we talked about catcher Shea Langeliers. Tomorrow we will be continuing on with A's Player Preview and Prediction series as we will be talking about an interesting player, third baseman Max Muncy, who we also had the opportunity to meet and interview actually last year. We'll dive into his outlook for 2026 and perhaps even take a look at spring training to see how his camp has gone thus far. And then we'll also do a check-in on our Friday show, which will be our return to regularly scheduling program as always, as we will have some updates from Mesa to see how the boys of summer are prepping for their season coming up, as well as a World Baseball Classic check-in to see how your favorite A's are doing with the World Baseball Classic tournament set to begin tomorrow night in Japan. And then just like today, we will continue on with Friday's edition of A's player preview and prediction, just to keep it clear and concise. That's all I have for you today. Once again, I'm your host, Joe Grado. Thank you for listening to my thoughts on everything athletics baseball. We're excited to see the return of the green and gold very shortly, and can't wait to see just what the A's do to get closer and closer to returning to the postseason dance. Take care, everyone. And once again, we will see you tomorrow and the following day for our A's player preview and prediction episodes. And then we'll be back for our regularly scheduled programming for our Friday show. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you all again real soon. And until then, Holy Toledo, let's go A's.